All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking all about stopping distances.
Yeah.
It's something that's absolutely essential, no matter where you're driving, but we're going to focus in on what it means if you're planning on taking a road trip to France.
Right. Yeah. And the French driving code is really particular about this stuff.
Yeah,
So we want to make sure that you're not only safe, but you're also following all the rules.
exactly. So let's start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about here when we say stopping distance?
Well, essentially, it's the total distance your car is going to travel.
Okay.
From the moment you spot a hazard to the moment you come to a complete stop. It's kind of like your safety net, that buffer zone you need to avoid a collision.
Okay, so it's like the moment you see something, like, oh, there's a problem,
Yep,
to
exactly.
the moment that your car is fully stopped, that whole distance.
That's it. And it's made up of two main parts. Your reaction time
Okay.
and your braking distance.
All right, so reaction time, that's like, how quickly can you slam on the brakes? Yeah.
Well, it's a little more than just that. It's that time from when your brain processes a hazard, so you see something,
Right.
to when your foot actually hits the brake pedal.
Okay.
So it's perception, decision-making, and then that physical action.
So it's not just about like having quick reflexes. It's actually your brain needs to catch up too.
Exactly. And there are a lot of things that can affect your reaction time.
Yeah, I would imagine like if you're tired, if you're distracted.
Absolutely. Fatigue is a big one.
Yeah.
Distractions, like you said, using your phone, or even just having a really engaging conversation in the car.
Right.
Even your age and how well you can see these things all play a role.
Wow. Okay, so it's a lot more complex than I initially thought.
Yeah.
And, we were looking at some research earlier, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that fatigue can actually double your reaction time.
Yeah. That's scary.
That's a really good deal.
It is.
So let's say, something happens and your reaction time is a little bit slower than usual. How much of a difference does that make in terms of the actual distance your car travels?
So think about it this way. You're driving down the road, let's say 50 kilometers per hour.
Okay.
That's about 30 miles per hour for those who aren't familiar with the metric system.
Right.
Now, if your normal reaction time is 1 second, you're going to travel about 14 meters before you even start braking.
Okay.
And 14 meters, that's about the length of a bus.
Wow.
But if you're fatigued and that reaction time doubles,
Right.
you're suddenly traveling 28 meters before you even react.
So essentially you've traveled the length of 2 buses.
Exactly. That extra distance could mean the difference between a close call
Oh, yeah.
and an accident.
Okay, so that's a pretty powerful visual, just thinking about like 1 second versus 2 seconds and how much further you're actually traveling.
And it all happens so quickly.
It does, yeah. Okay, so we've covered the reaction time distance. Now,
Yeah.
let's talk about that second part of the equation, which is actually getting your car to stop.
Right. So that's where braking distance comes in.
Okay.
And that's the distance your car travels from when you hit the brakes to when you're at a complete stop.
Okay.
Think of it like a line of several cars, all bumper to bumper. That's the kind of distance we're talking about.
I can picture that, but I'm guessing that number of cars changes quite a bit depending on how fast you're going, right?
Oh, absolutely. Speed is a huge factor when it comes to braking distance.
Makes sense.
And it's not linear.
Right.
If you double your speed, your braking distance doesn't just double. It can actually increase much more than that.
Oh, wow.
And then you have to factor in things like the road conditions.
Right, like if it's wet or icy.
Exactly. The condition of your brakes and your tires, even how heavy your car is, all of these things play a role.
So basically, the faster you go, the longer it takes to stop. And any slippery conditions are just going to make things worse. Okay, and that's where I think the French driving code gets really interesting because they have a specific way of factoring all of this in.
They do.
So tell me, what's the secret sauce? What are French drivers using to figure all of this out?
Well, they actually have a simplified formula to help calculate stopping distances.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah.
So what is this formula?
It's pretty straightforward, actually. You take your speed in kilometers per hour,
Yeah.
you divide it by 10, and then you square the result.
All right, so not too complicated, but I can see how it would be really helpful to have that in your back pocket when you're driving around France.
Exactly.
So let's try it out.
Oh.
Let's say we're going 50 kilometers an hour, perfect sunny day, dry roads, everything's great. What would our stopping distance be using this French formula?
All right, so let's plug it in. 50 kilometers per hour divided by 10 gives us 5.
Right.
And 5 squared is 25.
Okay.
So your stopping distance at that speed on a dry road would be about 25 meters.
So to give everyone a visual, that's like 5 or 6 mid-sized cars parked in a row.
Yeah.
Not exactly a small distance.
No, it's not.
But I'm guessing that number changes pretty dramatically if the weather takes a turn for the worse.
It does.
So what happens if those sunny skies turn gray and we're dealing with some wet roads?
Well, remember how we talked about road conditions affecting braking distance?
Yeah.
On a wet road, you can basically multiply that braking distance by 15.
Wow.
So in our example of 50 kilometers per hour, your stopping distance on a wet road jumps to about 37.5 meters.
Okay, so that's almost like 8 cars now.
Yeah, almost double.
That's a big difference.
It is.
And I imagine it just gets more and more dramatic as the speed increases.
Absolutely.
So what if we're on the highway? Let's say we're going 80 kilometers per hour.
All right, so 80 divided by 10 is 8.
Okay.
8 squared is 64.
Okay.
So on a dry road at 80 kilometers per hour, your stopping distance would be about 64 meters.
Okay. That's a pretty significant stretch of road.
It,
Now, what if we're really pushing it?
Yeah.
What if we're going, the maximum speed limit on a French highway, which is 130 kilometers per hour?
all right, hold on tight. 130 divided by 10 is 13.
Okay.
13 squared is 169.
Wow.
So at 130 kilometers per hour, you're looking at a stopping distance of 169 meters on a dry road.
That's almost the length of 2 football fields.
Yeah, it's a long way.
It really puts things in perspective when you think about it like that.
It does.
And remember, if it's raining or the roads are wet,
Mhm.
got to factor in that 15 multiplier.
Right?
So suddenly that 169 meters becomes well over 250 meters.
Yeah, that's a quarter of a kilometer.
That's a long way.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, how important it is to adjust your speed based on the conditions,
Yeah,
especially when you're driving in France, because those higher speed limits can be pretty tempting.
definitely.
But I'm curious about something, we talk about all these different factors, speed, road conditions, things like that.
Hmm.
But don't newer cars come with all sorts of fancy technology that can help with braking? Does that change things at all?
It does. And features like automatic emergency braking and adaptive cruise control can be real game changers when it comes to safety.
Okay, those sound pretty high tech.
Yeah.
Let's break those down a little bit. How do these systems actually work, and can they really make a difference when it comes to stopping distances?
So let's start with automatic emergency braking.
Okay.
This system uses sensors to scan the road ahead.
Okay.
And if it senses that you're approaching an obstacle too quickly and you haven't reacted,
Oh.
it can actually hit the brakes for you.
So it's like having a co-pilot with super fast reflexes.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But does it completely take over, or do you still have control of the car?
It's designed to be a safety net,
Okay.
not a replacement for you as the driver.
Right.
So think of it as a backup system. It's always monitoring the situation, but it's only going to step in if it senses you're not reacting quickly enough to avoid a collision.
Okay.
And you usually get a warning
Yeah.
first, a sound or a light on your dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't respond, the system activates and applies the brakes.
That's a pretty reassuring feature to have, I would say.
Yeah, especially for those oh no moments when something unexpected happens on the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so that's automatic emergency braking. Now, what about adaptive cruise control?
So adaptive cruise control is like a more sophisticated version of your traditional cruise control.
Okay, because regular cruise control just keeps your car at a set speed, right?
Right.
No matter what.
But adaptive cruise control uses radar to keep track of the distance between your car and the vehicle in front of you.
Oh, okay.
So if that distance starts to shrink, the system automatically adjusts your speed. It can slow down or even brake to maintain a safe following distance.
Oh, so it's like cruise control with a built-in awareness of what's happening around you.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be really helpful, especially, if you're on a long drive or in heavy traffic
Yeah.
and you're constantly having to adjust your speed.
Yeah, it takes some of that mental load off of you as the driver, and it can make for a smoother, more relaxed driving experience.
And, of course, by keeping that safe following distance, it helps prevent those rear-end collisions, which, unfortunately, are all too common.
Yeah, for sure. This is fascinating. It really feels like we've entered a whole new era of driving where technology is playing a much more active role in keeping us safe.
It really does.
But even with all of these advanced systems, I'm guessing it's still super important for drivers to understand the basic principles of stopping distances.
It is.
You can't just rely on the car to do all the thinking for you, right?
Exactly. These technologies are amazing tools, but they're not foolproof.
Yeah.
Things like bad weather, sensor malfunctions, even just the limitations of the technology itself can affect how well they work.
Right. So it's kind of like you've got this superpower, but one that comes with a user manual. You still need to know how to drive safely and make good decisions on the road, even with all the tech assistance.
Absolutely. You can't just rely on technology to do all the work for you.
Right. It's a partnership. You, the driver, are still ultimately responsible for the safety of yourself, your passengers, and everyone else on the road.
Well said. I think that's a really important point to emphasize. All right, so this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a much better understanding of how stopping distances work and why they're so important,
Good.
especially for anyone who's planning on driving in France. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the basics of reaction time and braking distance to how speed and road conditions can really affect things, and even how technology is changing the game.
And don't forget about that handy French formula for estimating stopping distances.
Absolutely.
It's a simple tool, but it can be a real lifesaver.
It really can. It's like this quick mental math trick that could help prevent accidents.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to get your take on something, we've talked about all these individual factors, speed, road conditions, driver behavior. But if we zoom out a bit, what do you think are some of the broader implications of really understanding stopping distances?
That's a great question. I think it really boils down to this understanding stopping distances is about more than just avoiding accidents.
Okay.
It's about shifting our mindset as drivers.
What do you mean by that?
It's about recognizing that we're not just operating a machine in isolation.
Right.
We're part of a complex system where our actions have consequences that extend far beyond our own vehicles.
So it's about understanding that we're all connected on the road, and the choices we make behind the wheel have a ripple effect.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of responsibility,
Yeah,
not just for our own safety, but for the safety of everyone around us.
I like that.
And that starts with being aware of our stopping distances, respecting speed limits, and adapting our driving to the conditions.
It's a powerful reminder that safe driving isn't just about following the rules. It's about being mindful, proactive, and always thinking a few steps ahead.
Absolutely.
It's about creating a culture of safety on the roads where everyone prioritizes responsible driving habits.
Well said. And I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. As you head out on your next drive, take a moment to consider how your driving habits and your understanding of stopping distances can contribute to a safer driving environment for everyone.
Yeah.
It's a collective effort. Every driver has a role to play.
Beautifully put. So to all our listeners out there, drive safely, stay informed, and remember every journey starts with a stop.
That's right.
We'll see you next time for part 2 of this deep dive on stopping distances in France.
Yeah, it really is a team effort when it comes to staying safe on the roads. And
Yeah.
speaking of teamwork, we've been talking about these stopping distances as they apply to any driver, but when it comes to France specifically,
Right.
they've really got some specific rules and regulations about all this.
They do. So for those of our listeners who are maybe thinking about planning a trip to France, or even just curious about, what it's like to drive in another country, what are some key takeaways they should keep in mind about stopping distances and the French driving code?
Well, first things first, you always got to remember that speed limits are strictly enforced over there,
Yeah.
and exceeding them can lead to some pretty hefty fines.
Yeah, and we've seen how even, a small increase in speed can really drastically increase that stopping distance.
Absolutely, every kilometer per hour counts.
Yeah.
And another thing to be really aware of is that road conditions can change dramatically from one region to the next,
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
especially when it comes to weather.
Right. If you're used to driving in, say, California where it's sunny all the time,
Exactly.
and then you find yourself on some winding road in the French countryside and it starts raining,
Yeah, you got to be prepared for that.
that's a whole different ballgame.
It is. So being mindful of those conditions and adjusting your speed accordingly is absolutely crucial for safe driving in France.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about being aware of your surroundings.
Exactly, being proactive.
And, of course, having that French formula for calculating stopping distances tucked away in your brain.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a simple but effective way to estimate the distance you need to come to a complete stop. It's like a little mental checklist to help you stay safe.
Yeah, for sure. This deep dive has honestly been so informative. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about stopping distances, but about the whole philosophy of driving safely in France.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, these principles apply no matter where you are in the world.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Whether you're cruising down a highway in California or navigating the charming streets of a French village, being aware of your stopping distances and driving responsibly is essential for everyone's safety.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so to all of our listeners out there, drive safely, stay informed, and remember, every journey starts with a stop.
That's right.
We'll be back next time with the third and final part of this deep dive on stopping distances in France.
Yeah, it really is a collective effort when it comes to road safety. We've talked a lot about stopping distances and the factors that affect them. But when we think about driving in France specifically, there's a unique set of rules and a whole culture around prioritizing safety that's really important to understand.
So for our listeners who are maybe dreaming of taking that French road trip someday,
Yeah.
what are some of the key takeaways they should really keep in mind about stopping distances and just navigating the French driving code in general?
Well, first and foremost, always remember that speed limits are strictly enforced in France.
Oh, yeah.
Exceeding them can lead to some pretty hefty fines. And as we've seen,
Right.
even a small increase in speed can make a huge difference in your stopping distance.
Absolutely. Every kilometer per hour counts.
Exactly. And another thing to be mindful of is that road conditions can vary so much
Yeah, that's a good point.
from one region to the next,
Right.
and especially when it comes to the weather.
Right? Like, if you're used to driving in a place where it's sunny and dry most of the time,
Yeah,
you might not be prepared for those sudden downpours or winding roads in the French countryside.
exactly. So being aware of those changing conditions and adjusting your speed accordingly is really crucial for staying safe on the roads in France.
It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about being adaptable.
Right, being proactive.
And of course, having that handy French formula for calculating stopping distances tucked away in your brain.
Absolutely. It's such a simple tool, but it can really be a lifesaver. It's like a quick mental check you can do to make sure you're giving yourself enough space.
Exactly. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding now.
Me too.
Not just about stopping distances, but about the entire approach to safe driving in France.
And remember, these principles of safe driving apply no matter where you are in the world.
That's so true. You know, whether you're on a wide open highway or navigating a busy city street, being aware of your stopping distances and driving responsibly is just essential.
Absolutely. It's about protecting yourself and everyone else on the road.
Well said.
All right.
All right, so to all our listeners out there, drive safely, stay informed, and remember, every journey starts with a stop. Voyage. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on stopping distances. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.